In this video, we're going to look at adding real numbers. Now, real numbers incorporates ones with decimals, ones with fractions, positive and negative numbers. Now, the first thing we need to learn about when adding real numbers is talk about the identity property of addition. This is basically for every real number, and we're going to say it's n, we can add 0 to n and it's still going to be n. So I can do 5 plus 0 and that's still 5. Or I could say negative 9 plus 0 and it's still negative 9. It doesn't do anything to the problem or change that original real number. Now, we also need to talk about what an inverse property of addition is. And that's saying for every real number n, there's going to be what we call an additive inverse. And you'll mainly hear the term additive inverse more so than you'll hear the term inverse property of addition. This additive inverse is basically the opposite of that real number. And when you add them together, you're going to get the sum of 0. So let's say I give you 17. The opposite of 17 is going to be negative 17. Add these two together and you're going to get 0. Now if I give you negative 4, the opposite of that's going to be 4. So you add 4 and negative 4 together and you're still going to get 0. So when you add these two numbers together, you get the sum of 0. Now when we're adding real numbers, there's different ways we can do it. The first way I'm going to show you is using a number line. Remember, you can basically start a number line anywhere you want. It goes on and on forever. This first one, 2 plus 6. Now you guys have been adding just positive numbers for quite some time. So in this one, this is an easy example. Basically you're going to start at 2 because that's your first number, and you're going to add 6 to it. So if I'm here, I'm going to move to the right 6 because it's positive. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I end here at 8. So when I do 2 plus 6, my answer is going to be 8. Now, with 2 plus a negative 6, it's a little different. Instead of adding 6, I'm going to be adding a negative 6. Still start at 2, but this time, since the first one was a positive 6, I went right. This one's a negative 6, so I'm going to go left. So I still go left 6. Now I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And my answer is going to be negative 4 because here I end at negative 4 when I basically add a negative 6 to 2. Now what if I have a negative 2 plus a positive 6? Well, in that case, I'm going to start at negative 2. This 6 is positive, so I'm going to go right 6 from that negative 2. Start here and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I end. Now, my answer is going to be 4 because that is 6 places from negative 2. This last one, both numbers are negative. I've got a negative 2 and a negative 6 added together. I start at negative 2, and since it's a negative 6, I go left. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I end at negative 8 because that is 6 places from negative 2 in the negative direction. Another way you can end integers is by using integer chips. Those are those two-sided chips. Typically they're yellow and red. A lot of times when we draw them, we'll do the positive and negative, like a closed circle and an open circle. So we need to remember that my closed circles are negative numbers, meaning a negative 1. My open circle is a positive number, a positive 1. Okay, now if I add one open circle and one negative circle, that's basically going to give me what we call a 0 pair, which is just equaling 0. So this first example, I got negative 6 plus 4. So I have 6 negative chips and I have 4 positive chips. Now I'm going to group one negative and one positive because that's going to give me a 0 pair, and I need to take those away. So I have one pair here, a pair here, there, and there. So basically I have 4 pairs of zeros. So I take those away, and what's left is just these 2 negative chips. And that's my answer. So negative 6 plus 4 is just negative 2 because that is what is left over. Now in this second example, I have 9 plus negative 5. So I have 9 positive chips and I have 5 negative chips. Now put together your zero or pairs where you've got an open circle and closed circle. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. Those go away because they all equal 0. And I'm left with 1, 2, 3, 4 positive chips. So that means my answer is positive 4. So 9 plus negative 5 is going to be a positive 4. Now this one I have negative 4 plus negative 2. Now I do my negative 4 chips and 2 of my negative chips. Now these I don't have any 0 pairs. I can't get rid of any. I can't match any with a closed circle and an open circle. So I just count up the total number of chips I have, and that's going to be negative 6 because all these chips are negative chips. Now let's look at some rules that, due to our 2 examples of how to add integers together, that we can come up with. So when we're adding with the same sign, meaning 2 positive numbers or 2 negative numbers, I'm going to add their absolute value. And then I'm going to keep the sign. So if it was 2 positive numbers, they're going to be positive. If it's 2 negative numbers, the answer is going to be negative. So 2 plus 6, both are positive. Add those 2 together, and you get 8, and you keep it 8. Now negative 4 and negative 5, they're both negative numbers, so my answer is going to be negative. So take the absolute value of negative 4, which is 4, absolute value of negative 5, which is 5, add 4 and 5 together, and you get 9. But remember, these 2 numbers were negative, so my answer's got to be negative. So your answer will be negative 9. Now, what if we're adding with different signs? What you need to do is find the difference of their absolute values and keep the sign of the added in with the greater absolute value, or the number with the greater absolute value. Okay? So here I've got negative 2 plus 6. Now, absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Absolute value of 6 is 6. The difference between 2 and 6 is 4. Now, the added in, or the number with the largest absolute value, is this 6. Now this 6 is positive, so my answer is going to be a positive 4. In this one, 2 plus a negative 6, it's different. Now, they both, 2 absolute value is 2, and absolute value of negative 6 is 6. So I do the difference between 6 and 2, which is 4. This time though, since this negative 6 has the largest absolute value between the two, and it's a negative number, my answer is also going to be a negative number, which means it's going to be a negative 4. Now let's apply these rules to some examples. Now this first one, both are negative numbers. So we're going to add their absolute values and take the negative. Okay, so 5 and 6 added together is going to be 11. They're both negative, so I have negative 11. This second one, we've got 2 different signs. So remember, take the absolute value of them. We got negative 9, absolute value of that is 9. 13, absolute value of that is 13. So the difference between 9 and 13 is going to be 4. And the greater absolute value is this 13, so my 4 is going to be positive. Now this one, both are negative, so I'm going to add 1.2 and 2.1, and that's 3.3. And they're both negative, so the answer is negative. Again, we have the same signs, negative numbers. So I do 7 plus 10, and that's 17. Since they are both negative, I have a negative 17. Now number 5, we have 2 different signs, okay? We also have fractions, 1/2 plus a negative 1/4. Now, we need to make sure first they have common denominators. Now 2 also goes into 4, so I'm going to change my 1/2 to 2/4. It's the same as 1/2, just written so that now I have common denominators. Now, one's a negative number, one's a positive number. That means I take the absolute value of both. So this is still 2/4. This would be 1/4. I take the difference between 2/4 and 1/4, and that's 1/4. Now, the number that has the largest absolute value is this 2/4. It's larger than 1/4. So since it's positive, my answer is going to be positive. So I get a positive 1/4 as my answer. Now, we will also be evaluating expressions using positive and negative numbers and adding them. So in this first example, I've got negative n, or we call that sometimes the opposite of n, plus 8.9 for when n is going to be equal to negative 2.3. Now remember, when I plug in a number for a variable, I put in parentheses so I don't get these negative numbers mixed up. Because if you notice, I have the opposite of n. That doesn't mean n's negative, it means the opposite of n. So the opposite of negative 2.3, not just negative 2.3. So if I take the opposite of negative 2.3, that's going to give me the positive 2.3. Then I add 8.9 to it. Both are positive numbers, so my answer is going to be positive, and you add the two together to get 11.2. Now the second one says negative 2 plus t, and t is going to be 7.1. Now when I plug it in, I have one negative number and one positive number. When I do that, remember, I find the absolute value of each one. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Absolute value of 7.1 is 7.1. Now 7.1 is greater than 2, so I'm going to have a positive answer, and I'm going to find the difference. So I do 7.1 minus 2, and that's 5.1. Remember, 7.1 had the bigger absolute value, the larger one, so it's going to be a positive number.